Welcome back to Hometown Hunky. I'm Chris Hunky, your host, and on today's episode, we are continuing with the 1970 CUDA build. We will be modifying the transmission crossmember to improve the clearance of the exhaust for ground clearance. Enjoy. Okay, so at this point we've taken the chassis, we've rolled it out from underneath the car. We put the bang wheels back on and put it on some wheel rollers. We got the car chassis out from under the body so that we have room to work under the car without having to straddle the chassis. That is to install these new frame rails on the rear and trunk floor and that kind of thing. Nobody was trying to bench ride this thing. In this seat, we're taking the cross member off. This rear cross member for the transmission needs to be altered to buy us about an inch of space, room for the exhaust. There is a gap between the cross member and the bottom of the car. And if we can raise that crossbar an inch, that gives us more room for the exhaust. This car is going to be so low as it is, an inch, that might represent 20 or 25% of the clearance underneath the car. This thing's going to be struggling to make it over a speed bump at this point. So we're going to be moving forward here, working mostly on this cross member right now. All right, I have this cross member out of the car chassis, just sitting in my lap. This is the transmission mount that I just took off from underneath this mock-up transmission, and the way that it was seated on the car was like this, and the bolts went up through there. Now to buy an inch of space to raise this up an inch, I don't have room to lower this entire bracket by an inch, but what I'm going to do is remove the bracket here from this bar and flip it to 180 by that inch of space there. And then on the ends, we're going to cut this off of this plate and manufacture a larger plate that's taller so that it's kind of be cone shaped, where this will bolt into the frame in the same spots, but that moves this to come up 1 inch and be about this high on the plate. So that plate mounts into this spot on the frame rail right here, and on the other side right there, so there'll be room for that to come up to this inch and see, these kind of represent the bottom of the floor of the car, and that's where we have that inch to go. So that'll be very helpful. And I got a buddy that'll do the TIG welding for us, and it'll probably look better than that when we're done. Thanks. Okay, here's my vise. I got it in the vise with a towel. Yeah, don't mind my bench back there. It's a little dirty, but it occurs to me that it's entirely possible that doesn't look symmetrical. The whole left to right thing. So I'm going to take some measurements between the bracket and the sides and compare them so that when I get the bracket flipped, it's exactly the right spot again. All right, I'm glad I did that, because just crude measurements here without getting nitty gritty. Hook that in there. That's like 15 and 3/8. 14 1/4. So yeah, that's a little bit off center. Remember that going together. So having this in the vise, I was trying with the air saw, and even with a new blade, it wasn't working so great. I marked my center line of the bracket on the center line of the bar, so then when it's going back together, I can find my center line. That's because, as we just measured, it's not equal from one side to the other. So next thing is to We're going to have to get real aggressive. We're going to have to use the acetylene torch to cut this off, old school. But before I do that, I mean, we're going to be sacrificing these end pieces. Before I cut them with a torch, I need to get a pattern off of these for the bolt pattern and be able to use that pattern to build new ones. So that's what we're doing right now with this pattern. Okay, so we're going to
Yeah, it just showed up. Oh. Getting them checked in right now. I didn't know there was miles to come clean up for tomorrow, but I can do this one, then I can clean it all up. So there was no demo.
So that's our pattern, the footprint of the piece we're going to need to rebuild and make it bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and peel this off and attach it to one of these kind of a heavy paper board that I have. This is our piece that we're going to take, and I'll mark it for being an inch higher. Right now the pipe is centered in the old one. So the pipe is 1 3/4 inch pipe, and so I'm gonna sharpen. So we're here with that. That's a 1.5 inch pipe. But where it's cut at an angle on this, it's bent to a curve and cut at an angle. That 1.5 inch pipe is closer to 2 inches on the surface that this mounts. So we're going to call this like 2 inches here, and it's welded in evenly on the whole thing. So then if we're going to raise the bar by 1 inch, then this needs to be mounted by 1 inch higher than this. So now the pipe would need to get welded on at that point. From now this is where the pipe would get welded on like this. So that means that our margin here needs to be added to this. So that's our margin. So we're going to want to have this be kind of flat at the top just a little bit, and then curve around to the side. So that's essentially the new footprint for the plate. That we'll need to make 2 of these. Now I guess the next step would be just to get this thing cut apart. We're going to have to take a acetylene torch to this, sacrifice the... down that way. That's what we'll do.
If you're enjoying these videos, please share, like, subscribe, click notifications, all that good stuff. We'll keep on doing them. Thank you.
So now I've cut around the perimeter of the old welds on both of these end pieces. But my new end pieces are going to need to be able to fit flush on the outside. So the thickness of this end piece that's still on the pipe will have to be removed. And then this, I should be able to get off without having to use a torch. I don't want to use a torch on that seam because I don't want to damage the pipe or cut more of the bracket away than I want to. So I got some cleanup to do. It off. Alright, so ultimately I'm going to flip this right here, but I gotta do a lot of cleanup on that and clean this up too. You can see where you can kind of see a hairline fracture looking thing in there where the old plate is, the edge of the old plate. You see more on this side, there's a gap, and what I'm going to do is be grinding this clean around the edges till that old plate comes off, and then the new plate, there'll be room for the new plate to go on, and then this will just get cleaned up and ready to do a reverse flip on that. And I'll grind and clean up the bracket. Here's the bracket that was welded on in this orientation, and we're going to weld it on in this orientation. So that's the difference. I'll get the bracket cleaned up and we'll get that ready to go. All right, so we're on this CUDA chassis, rear transmission cross member modification. And we're close to welding it back together in its new position on the cross member. But what I'm going to do, I've got it mocked up in its old position, and I'm going to show you the difference between what it was and what we're going to make it, so you can see the gain we're going to get with the exhaust. So you can see here the car chassis is actually on some roller wheels, and we still have our temporary shock mount in there that we made compared to the coilover on this side. Coilover springs there. So it's not perfectly level from side to side, but you'll get the idea here where we'll just measure it in the middle, I guess. What I'm going to show you here is what we're gonna gain for room for the exhaust. Because on this vehicle, so the exhaust will come off of these headers and come rearward. There'll probably be some catalytic converters there, and then in this section it'll do the cross exhaust, the X brace exhaust for equalizing whatever. But this chassis is still whatever 4 or 5 inches higher than it will be at ride height. So here we are with kind of a, you know, that's sitting there at 9 inches right now. And if we lower this thing 4 or 5 inches, let's say 4 inches, then the Crossmember, let's say the wheel carts only take up 3 inches. I don't know. If this thing comes down 3 inches, then your Crossmember for the transmission is at 6 inches from the ground. And if you have 3-inch exhaust, now you're only 3 inches from the ground on the exhaust. And you drive over a speed bump, you know, that shit's gonna be, that's gonna be, okay, we've pretty much got the basic setup here with the Crossmember at the adjusted height that's higher. So remember we had these plates on there before. We cut the end off and that was at the bottom. Now we've raised it an inch up to the upper part on both sides, and we flipped that bracket from the U-shape being down to the U-shape being up. Now, real basically here, we've gained our inch of ground clearance that we didn't have before. Before we were looking at about 9 inches. Now we got our 10 inches. And we have not changed where the position of the transmission is. So we've gained that inch, maybe an inch and a quarter of space for the exhaust. We're not interfering with the transmission drive shaft, and we've not changed the position of the rear of the transmission at all. Now we'll get this tack welded together, and then we'll send it out for TIG welding, and then powder coating. That's it.
Just a few miles down a Beauty Mountain Road is the finest place I ever know, where I spent many a summer as a child. To the great woods up north we drive back and forth, and every trip was better than the last. Waiting for us up there in a state of disrepair was our home away from home at the top of the hill. We'd pull on in the middle of the night, unpack our things in the pale moonlight, look up at more stars than you'll ever see. It was the best place around, but we had to tear it down. You could look out through the trees and see for miles. It was far from the town, there weren't nobody around, at my Minnesota hilltop country cabin.